The Indonesian live export row has focused national attention on the rights of farm animals in an unprecedented way. And although the trade's resumed and federal parliaments declined at this stage to legislate it out of existence, there's little doubt fundamental questions remain over the future of the billion-dollar business. Hardly surprising then that animal welfare has become such a significant new force in Australian legal circles. From law students through to a former High Court judge, there's a growing awareness of animal law, the rights, or lack thereof, for farm animals and the implications for Australian agribusiness, as Sean Murphy reports.
Can a dog inherit money directly? Because the pet itself is property, property can't own property.
At the University of Sydney, these law students are learning about property trust for companion animals. But as part of their final year elective, they'll also cover issues directly related to Australian agriculture.
We talk about the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals Act and the similar acts across the states. We look at free range, so standards for something to be technically called free range, and just use that as a bit of a comparison, talk about enforcement issues. We also are going to spend, because of the amount of interest in the issue, we're also going to spend a class looking at the live export.
There are now 9 Australian universities, soon to be 10, teaching animal law to the nation's future lawyers. Interest in animal law extends well beyond Australia's university law schools. It's now a growing field of legal practice with specialist law firms. There's even a former High Court judge now acting as patron of an animal rights group. It's early days yet, but it's going to have major implications for farming.
Our experience in Europe is that politicians are only going to agree to some major new reform if they're convinced, firstly, that there is widespread public support.
Peter Stevenson is a lawyer and lobbyist with Compassion in World Farming. He's been in Australia as a guest of the animal rights group Voiceless. At this lecture for the Law Society of New South Wales, he's explaining how the law has been used to drive major reforms in Europe, such as enshrining in law that farm animals be treated as sentient beings.
It underpins EU law in the field of animal welfare because the actual founding treaty has been amended to recognise animals as sentient beings, and the treaty goes on to say that that when formulating and implementing EU policies on agriculture, that the Union and the Member States have to pay full regard to the welfare requirements of animals.
So in practical terms, what changes has it led to or will it lead to?
What it's led to is then the specifics of the ban on barren battery cages, the ban on sow stalls, and also the ban on veal crates. So the fact that animals are recognised as sentient beings in the treaty is the kind of starting point for all of the kind of changes that are now happening.
Here in Australia, farm animals have no such rights. At law, they are considered the property of their owners. According to one of Australia's great law reformers, recognising the sentience of farm animals is a reform which must occur.
Animals are sentient beings. They share with us the experiences of feeling pain, of feeling grief, of feeling isolation. Many Australians think that meat is something that just comes at the local supermarket. But you've got to think, as a conscious being, you've got to think of where it comes from and what suffering animals have been occasioned and what we as human beings are obliged to do to reduce that suffering, even if we continue to eat and use meat.
Will you sign for me?
Would I sign it?
Michael Kirby may have retired from the High Court of Australia, but he's still arguing the case for law reform. He recently became a patron of Voiceless and says he no longer eats meat.
In a way, I'm just an ordinary Australian who's come upon this idea rather late in life. But if you speak to young people, and particularly young lawyers, they're very hot about this issue. It's an issue they feel very strongly about, and I believe we're going to see much more about this, not just in law schools, but in the political debates of our country, including on live export of animals, on traditional killing of animals for religious reasons, and in that sense we'll simply be following the Europeans on the greater protection of animal species.
The shocking cruelty inflicted on Australian cattle in Indonesia, exposed by ABC TV's Four Corners program, has made animal welfare a hot national issue. Political pressure is building on the entire live export industry, worth nearly $1 billion and with 10,000 jobs at stake.
The countries that we export to, the vast majority have no laws to protect animals from cruelty, and where they do, they're not enforced. And in many of these countries, they're still to even acknowledge that animals and their welfare matter.
And while Parliament last week rejected 2 bills to end the trade, its future is now being questioned as never before.
Let's remember that New Zealand no longer has live exports. Live exports have dropped enormously in England from the 1990s to now. In England, they used to export millions of sheep and cattle. Now no cattle are exported. The sheep have gone from millions down to a few thousands. So there is a shift around the world that Australia needs to catch up with. In Australia, it can be a win-win here that we could revitalise many regional areas by processing the beef in Australia.
Processing meat in Australia and creating jobs and wealth in regional centres is just one policy in an expanded animal welfare agenda for the Greens. And with more power than ever before in the federal parliament, the Greens' animal welfare portfolio is being taken very seriously by the National Farmers Federation.
Look, the makeup of Parliament at the moment is a concern to us, there's no doubt about that. You've got a minority government and that 4 or 5 people sitting in the middle there are very influential. You've now got a Senate that's Green dominated, so if a piece of legislation goes through that the Senate with the Greens there can support, then obviously it's an issue. So there's going to be a lot of work done on a multitude of issues in relation to agriculture, a lot of work done with the crossbenchers to get them to understand the implications of any suggested piece of legislation, just exactly what it could cause the industry, the damage it could cause the industry, or the damage it could cause food production or food security in the world.
The Greens want to phase out all intensive farming of meat, dairy and eggs.
Well, look, I think it is realistic. It's obviously something that has to happen over time, and I'm not about to bring any private members' bills before the Parliament about this issue because there needs to be obviously considerable discussions. But what is achievable here, and many of the studies are showing, there can be an increase in productivity, an increase in a healthier product that the farmers have when stock are managed in a way that is more natural.
The Australian Egg Corporation says a move away from intensive egg production would drive the cost of eggs up 4-fold to about $12 a dozen and would not produce better animal welfare outcomes.
What we are concerned about is the phasing out of any production system that provides animal welfare benefits. The caged egg production system, for example, provides the benefits of lower parasitic loads per bird, no soil or manure-borne diseases, certainly reduced cannibalism, protection from predators, and as a result, lower mortalities. So if we take a holistic definition of animal welfare, cage systems provide animal welfare benefits. The one benefit the cage is debatable in terms of it providing is space, sufficient space for the bird to actually undertake its natural behaviours.
The significant things are that you've got extra height, you've got a full-width door.
The Australian Egg Corporation says growers have invested in major welfare improvements and worked to a national industry code.
We've invested significantly over the past and will continue to do so in research and development of the animal husbandry practices that take place on farm day in, day out. We also undertake training courses on farm. So from that perspective, these are tangible, on-the-ground practices and investments that we are making as an industry with the support of government What we don't see is that resource support coming from those animal activists that may not agree with the type of welfare outcomes being delivered.
Australian Pork Limited also argues the best welfare outcomes are driven by the industry itself, such as its voluntary move to spend more than $50 million phasing out controversial sow stalls by 2017.
It's a very bold and progressive decision the industry's taken. It still will be seen as to whether it's successful or not. We want to work with government, the Greens included, to get as much support as they can give us to make sure that this initiative is a success. Because if it's not a success, there's two things going to happen. One is that such bold and progressive decisions won't be made anymore by livestock industries. And the other one is that we'll put ourselves out of business. We'll be importing pork from overseas. It'll come from countries with lower welfare standards. And the net welfare outcome will be completely negative. And that's in no one's interest.
The Greens say they want any imports to match Australian standards, a position Australia's livestock producers happily support.
Look, I'm not sure that's a credible goal, but it's certainly something that our industry's been arguing for a long time also, that we should import a product in Australia should be produced under the same standards that product is produced in Australia. And that means environmental standards, industrial standards, OH&S, water, welfare standards, all of those things.
Under World Trade Organisation rules, making demands on standards of production is seen as a restraint of trade. But in Europe, lawyers acting for the animal welfare lobby believe this may be challenged under what's known as Article 20.
The Article 20 exemptions do allow, trade restricting measures to protect, amongst other things, public morals and animal health. And I think there's now an increasing recognition that, in fact, these Article 20 exemptions may allow the EU and other WTO members to sometimes say that they want their imports to come from animals that have been reared and slaughtered to standards equivalent to their own.
In Australia, livestock industries are run by a series of national codes, which are overseen by state departments of agriculture or primary industries. Animal rights groups argue there's an inherent conflict of interest between welfare and production, and that the legal system makes it difficult to pursue cases of alleged neglect or cruelty.
This is Julie. She's one of our farmers.
No, there's no cages in our sheds.
Voiceless is preparing a complaint to the Australian Competition and Consumer Commission over these advertisements, which it believes mislead consumers. It says meat chickens have never been grown in cages and hormones haven't been used for nearly 50 years. It alleges the ads imply a standard of production far different to reality.
There are no added hormones in Steggles chickens.
Steggles stands by its ads, but Voiceless admits in other cases it has little access to legal action.
It's not enough that you want to right a wrong. You need to show that you have a personal advantage or disadvantage, what's known under law as a special interest in the outcome of the case. And as I said, just because you see something like kangaroo culling, that a group like Voiceless might see, well, that is wrong because it is cruel, that's not enough. There's got to be that personal advantage or disadvantage.
So how can that be reformed?
There is such a thing in animal law circles and in other circles as well, but animal laws refer to it often as creative lawyering.
Creative lawyering has helped activists from animal liberation expose cases of alleged cruelty, such as at this battery egg farm north of Sydney in 1995. Charges of trespass against its members helped the group bring its allegations to court. Animal Liberation has since pursued an aggressive agenda, often courting trespass charges to make its claims in court. Now it's considering a case which could have major ramifications for all livestock industries. Mulesing and other husbandry practices such as tail docking, castration and dehorning are exempt from the Cruelty to Animals Act because they're considered necessary procedures. But the Act says the exemptions only apply where there's no unnecessary suffering. Animal Liberation contends that animals are subject to unnecessary suffering when pain relief medication is not used. It's investigating whether farmers could be charged for not using pain relief.
So I have just met with Assistant Police Commissioner for Rural Crime and his legal advisors, and they're looking at the issue that if, for example, mulesing was to occur without the use of pain relief, is the person who did the mules operation exempt and protected by that section? Because now there is an affordable, easily available substance which will reduce the suffering of the animal for up to 80% or more. And if that's not used, they are no longer protected. That's the question they're looking at. So it's going to have implications where I think, bodies like AWI and Australian Meat and Livestock Association, they have to really represent the interests of the farmers and seriously look at all of the practices that may have been routine for many years in Australia, that maybe the day will come when they're going to be under scrutiny again very soon, and it may be looked at as possible breaches of law.
The New South Wales Police say there are no plans to challenge the exemptions, but they're monitoring developments with new pain relief applications and, where possible, will promote their use. Ultimately, the court of public opinion, consumer demand, may be the biggest driver of change on animal welfare. And in that regard, some Australian retailers are already following Europe's lead.
It's public opinion that has led to the changes, the reforms in the law. It's public opinion that is making many big retailers now adopt animal welfare standards that go beyond the kind of legal requirements. Not just retailers. McDonald's is the largest food service operator in Europe, and over 90% of its eggs are free range across 23 European countries.